Dreamscape presents Your Life is Worth Living, 50 Lessons to Deepen Your Faith by Fulton Sheen. Foreword by Robert Barron. Narrated by Gary Gallone.
Foreword by Bishop Robert Barron. The book you're about to read is the closest thing we have to a Summa Sheeniana, a summary of Archbishop Fulton Sheen's teachings on the Christian faith. Much of the wisdom contained in Sheen's radio programs, television shows, sermons, classroom presentations, retreat talks, books, and lectures is synthetically presented here. The essays gathered in this book are written transcripts of audio tapes that the greatest Catholic evangelist of the 20th century made in 1965, when he was 70 years old. What you hear is the confident voice of an old pro, a master teacher who had been plowing the evangelical and apologetic field for some 40 years. As I reread these chapters, I was struck by three qualities that Fulton Sheen had in spades. He was smart, he had a comprehensive vision, and he possessed one of the most active analogical imaginations in the history of the Church. Permit me to say something simple about each one of these. Archbishop Sheen had a magnificent intellectual formation in Catholic philosophy and theology, culminating in his rare agrégé postdoctoral degree from the Catholic University of Louvain. Moreover, he taught for many years at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and he composed a number of academically sophisticated texts. Thus, when he turned to a wider audience, he did not engage in crude or simplistic popularization. Rather, he brought to his task considerable intellectual firepower. In the course of Your Life is Worth Living, he mentions and quotes, among many others, Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle, Cicero, John Henry Newman, Confucius, George Bernard Shaw, Isaac Newton, Martin Heidegger, Carl Jung, Shakespeare, and T.S. Eliot. How we need this sort of urbanity and intellectualism in our age of dumbed-down Catholicism. Second, he demonstrates in this book, and indeed throughout his work, a marvelously integrated understanding of the mysteries of the Christian faith. We have entered, sadly in my judgment, into an era of hyper-specialization in theology. According to the cliché, we have many theologians and philosophers who know more and more about less and less. But Sheen ranges widely and comfortably over the whole arena of Catholic thought, speculating on creation, the incarnation, the doctrine of God, the Trinity, theological anthropology, grace, sin, redemption, the resurrection, the Blessed Mother, the papacy, and the mystical body. And he doesn't simply cover this extraordinarily wide terrain. He shows the interconnections among the various topics, how, for instance, the Church is the prolongation of the Incarnation across space and time, and why the virginity of Mary is an indicator of the truth of the Incarnation. How a correct understanding of sin leads to a correct understanding of the cross, etc. In so doing, he practices the art of truly systematic theology, and he manages, therefore, to make the faith satisfying both to the intellectual and to the aesthetic sensibility of his reader. The third, and to me anyway, most remarkable quality evident in these essays is the author's gift for finding analogies, comparisons, and illustrations to explicate the Christian mysteries. It is a commonplace among teachers that the key to all effective instruction is building bridges from the known to the unknown. And this process happens largely through analogy. Every effective teacher, from kindergarten through graduate school, says some version of, "This principle I'm trying to teach you, well, it's like this other principle you already understand." I don't know anyone in the great tradition of Christian preaching, catechesis, or theologizing, who exercises this analogical method with greater skill than Fulton Sheen. Examples abound within this book. The 7 sacraments are like white light that breaks into colors when passed through a prism. Grace lifts us to a higher form of life, just as an animal absorbs a plant into its life, and a plant lifts chemicals into its life. Mary's sinlessness is like a lock separating foul waters from pure. The Holy Spirit is the sigh of love breathed out by the Father and the Son. The Mass is like a drama, repeated by a traveling troupe of players, and so on. These comparisons and images seem to tumble out of him, but I imagine that they were invented and then refined by Sheen over many years of popular communication. One might get the impression that, given my enthusiasm for Fulton Sheen, I think we should simply go back to his method and content in our work of evangelization. But that would be mistaken. We must certainly learn from him, but we also must follow him in creatively engaging the culture of our own time. In a way, and I speak from a good deal of practical experience here, evangelization is a much harder task today than it was in Sheen's time. This is because the good Archbishop could assume a remarkably broad cultural consensus around many issues moral, philosophical, and even religious. The very fact that huge numbers of non-Catholics avidly followed him testifies to this truth. But this consensus has largely evanesced today, and this is why a simple repetition of his ideas, images, and comparisons might not be effective for the contemporary audience. But we should indeed endeavor to be as smart as he was, as boldly comprehensive and synthetic as he was, and willing to exercise our analogical imagination with something of his flair and creativity. Preface. This is the story of a friendship born through the writings of Fulton J. Sheen. I discovered Archbishop Sheen in the summer of 1981. After I graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point, retired Army Colonel Richard F. Ascatino befriended me. He had completed a master's degree in philosophy and had written his thesis on Sheen. Ash introduced me to Sheen's writing, and I was immediately taken by the Archbishop's gift of communication and read 30 of his books within 12 months. During 1982, while searching for other books by Sheen, I purchased a copy of recordings he had dictated in 1965. The original title of this record set was Life is Worth Living. Although the recordings shared the same title and format as the popular television program, this oral compendium was completely unrelated and was produced 8 years after the show went off the air, at the conclusion of Vatican II. The television program format presented a new message to a general audience each week, not necessarily religious and not always related to the previous show, but always with the hope of drawing one soul closer to God. This work advances that of the television show. Sheen builds on each lesson and draws the individual soul into a personal relationship with Christ. The recordings were made in the privacy of Sheen's New York City residence. Without the use of notes, the work flowed from his heart, drawing on 45 years' experience as a priest. Each topic ran about 25 minutes. To illustrate his points, he used many stories from his own life, in addition to referencing over 450 scriptural passages and many noted poets and authors. Socrates said, "The best flavoring for drink is thirst." Sheen's vast appeal was due to the fact that he had related to people of all religious backgrounds. He received thousands of letters as a result of his radio and television ministries, with only a third coming from Catholics. This work was an attempt to quench the immense spiritual thirst of people from around the world. The international demand for Sheen's message went beyond his capability to fulfill each individual request. He created this vinyl encyclopedia to respond to the needs of the hundreds of thousands who wrote for personal direction.